Okay, so next section to cover is macros in the system. So make an easy button. I need something that does this for me every time because I'm tired of pushing the same button the same way every day that I touch GP. And this was something that, was one of my very, very early projects whenever I first started with Turnkey. Was just one of the customers we were implementing at the time. We walked through and developed how their day-to-day was going to be, and they constantly printed the sales documents for their shipping purposes over and over and over again with the exact same settings, the exact same boxes and everything, and they just asked if there was something that could make their life easier. So that's where macros come into play. So what is a macro? So a macro it's basically a series of recorded steps, clicks of any day-to-day function. It can be used to complete that same function basically on autopilot. And GP has this functionality built into it. There's a lot more in-depth, advanced methods for using macros. We've developed macros that go through and key in loads of information from an Excel spreadsheet and all this other stuff. But what we'll look at today is just kind of the introduction. How can I use it today as a regular user without having to have somebody else do it for me? What could I do? So my example here, the user in my instance, he selected a lot of stuff. When he gets into the print sales screen, he had to change it to invoice. He had to tell it to print the documents potentially. He had to check the box, had to tell it to send the documents in an email if need be. He wanted to reprint previously printed. He wanted the batch of daily, and that was kind of it. So that was the entire bunch of different things in this example that he was checking each time that he went in. So how can we make that easier for us in the system? So macros can basically go through and populate a form with you. You'll click some buttons, it'll navigate to a new window or quickly populate information on a window that you would normally use to, that would take several moments to do. And of course, the benefit there is that it saves you time. It's not the same repetitive, mundane thing that you're having to do over and over again. It's made a little bit easier, a little bit quicker, because as you know, some of the windows in GP just they need some attention, but that same attention is the same information every single time you get in. So macros are available within Dynamics GP. You can find them on any window that you're in underneath the tool dropdown at the top. So anytime you click on this, and as long as your security permits it, you should have a macro option underneath there to get you started. So you would find it underneath there, and all you would essentially do is hit record. So here are the steps that we would take to get started with it. Just wanted to map these out for you, and we're going to go through and we're going to create one here in a moment so that you can see it working and kind of how it could function for you on a day-by-day. So we'll start by mapping out your steps that you want to use. You want to make sure that you define exactly what it is that you do, kind of set up a script for what it is that you're going to do. I mean, you live it day in and day out exactly what you're doing, but you want to try to be as clean as possible as you're doing this macro, because it's going to click everything. It's going to do everything that you're doing. So if you clicked here, you clicked there, you went over here, whatever, it's going to record all of those steps. So try to make, in a way, either a mental script or even just type it out exactly what you're going to do within that window and put it together. When you're ready, you're going to go up to of course, the tools drop down like I showed a moment ago, and you're going to select record. As soon as you hit record on that, it's going to pop up and ask you where you want to save that specific file. Make it somewhere easy to find. Save it somewhere. I usually just throw mine on the desktop to begin with, and then I'll figure out somewhere else to put it at that point. But make sure that it's somewhere easy so that you can find it later on when you need to. Then once you've selected the file, you'll just perform the steps that you wanted to record. When you're done, just go back up to that same menu that we went to a moment ago and hit stop record. And that's going to basically write that macro file with everything that transpired between you hitting record and hitting stop record. So from there, what can we do with the macro after that, after we create a macro? Well, we can bolt it onto that shortcut pane we looked at a moment ago whenever we were looking at the smart lists. in the system. So that same section in there, benefit there obviously is that once we bolt it onto there, we can tag it with a keyboard shortcut. So now when I open up my window and I hit the F9 key, all of a sudden it does everything in that window that I need it to do. In fact, I could have the F9 key just basically pull the window up, do everything, and I'm on my way. I don't even have to go find that window. So it just depends on how you want it to function. You're going to have some trial and error with it. So, you know, just have that in mind that you're going to go through, and if it doesn't work the first time, rinse and repeat and try it again, figure out where you misstepped along the way. One thing that I do want to note is as we add that macro to a shortcut pane or, you know, create these, if multiple users are going to be using this macro, save a dedicated file for each specific user. So copy, paste for each user that's going to be using it. Because if you have a bunch of people using the same macro at the same time, I've seen errors come up with it because too many people are trying to use the exact same file running at the same time. So just make sure that everybody has their own dedicated file to be able to work with. As we add that shortcut, just give it a name, point to wherever you saved the macro file, whether it's the location that you chose in the previous set of things after you recorded or wherever you moved it to. And then once you get done with that, then you go in and you just fire it off and see how the macro works for you. I find that the shortcuts are the easiest way to run a macro. You could, as we saw in the previous window, you could select play manually anytime you wanted to, find that macro file and run it at that point. But bolting it onto a function key is so much more efficient than having to go and find the file every single time that you wanted to run it. Now, I will grant that if you had multiple different macro files for doing multiple different things in the same window, play is kind of a nice feature because it would go out and you could just choose which one you wanted it to run. But in my mind, if it's the same thing over and over again and there aren't any variations to my normal step-by-step, then going through and bolting it onto a function key is very beneficial. So without further ado, you know, of course, we're presenting to you from the Show Me State here. So let's go ahead and break into a demonstration and see how we can make a macro function for us to put together default settings on our sales print screen in the system. So I'm going to go ahead and back out of this. Let's get GP pulled up here. And let me just get my sales print screen going here. I'm just going to go in and clear this out, close out of it, and we'll just start from the beginning. So I'm going to find my screen that I want to work with. In this case, the sales print documents. Now I know that I want to get started at this point. So I know I want to change this to invoice. I know that I want it to print documents, yada, yada. So I'm going to go through. I'm going to hit Tools in the dropdown. I'm going to go to Macro and Record. I'm going to find a location that I want to save this. And that's the one that I was playing around with. Let's just give it a different name real quick. Call this V2 and save. All right, so I've saved my macro. It's recording now. So as soon as I've chose to save that location, it's sitting here recording. So I want to make sure that I'm nice and clean the way that I'm working now. So I'm going to hit my drop down. I'm going to select invoice. I'm going to go check my box for document. I'm going to go check my box for packing slip. I'm going to make sure that all this information looks good. Let's go ahead and check the box for send document in an email. Let's tell this to print the ship to with the line items and reprint previously printed. Same thing for over here. And let's go ahead and tell it to print the customer item numbers. We'll drop down, grab our batch. Go ahead and find our batch ID. This part, I want you to be aware it's much better to have it in mind and type it in versus going into the window and selecting. And the reason for that is if I go in here and I select it this time and it's not in that same location the next time, it's not going to work right. So typing in the value is much better than finding it in the list here. So I'm just going to grab test at this point. So I'm going to type in test for the second one, and hit insert. Okay, so that's everything that I want this to do at this point. I'm not going to hit any other buttons. I'm going to go ahead and stop my record at this point because I want it to fill all this information out, but I want to hit the print button. So now I'm going to go back into macro and stop record. Okay, so now that that's done, let's just see what it looks like. So we could go back and we could go ahead and bolt it onto the shortcut if we want to. I'm just going to give it a test in here. So I'm going to go underneath the drop down here, macro, and then I'm going to choose to play. I'm going to find my macro that I want to use. And there it is. Looks good. So let's go ahead and let's exit out of the window. And we'll come back in. Clean slate, nothing populated. Tools, macro, play. Grab my V2 that I saved it as, and open. It's going to run through, and within 5 seconds, nice that it tells you that, 5 seconds is all it took. Now you saw how it kept recording of me pulling up that window. Maybe that's not the way that I want it to look. It's probably going to bother you with it like that, but you notice how it captured everything that I did at that point. But it took care of all that in 5 seconds. So versus me having to come in and select that each time, my macro ran that quick. Now let's go back and let's clean this up real quick. I'm going to go back. I didn't like that that window popped up. I'm going to go back, start from the beginning, macro, record. I'm just going to go over the top of this one because that's a bad one. Okay, so we're recording again. So drop down, invoice, document, packing slip, send document and email. Go ahead and reprint previously printed. Print the ship to addresses with the line. Now, why not do the customer item number? Reprint, packing slip per site, print customer item. Click our drop down, batch, type in my batch ID, and insert. Back to tools, macro, and we'll just stop that record. Okay, so now if I was to run that again, it should be a lot cleaner to begin with. So I'll just clear the screen here, go back to tools, macro, play, find our V2, see if this runs a little bit quicker this time. Ooh, 3 seconds instead of 5. So a lot more efficiency for it at that point, taking care of some of the clicks for me as I work through. Same concept on any other screen that you find you're doing the exact same redundant steps with each time you get into that window. Record the macro, type in your things as carefully as possible, selecting, it will capture the button clicks, it will capture the typing. Not so good in the lookups, again, because those records could shift from the time that you selected them to the next time that you select them and so on. So the other side of this, after we put that together, is then bolting it onto something that makes it a lot more functional. Like I said, hit the drop down, choose play, find your file, and run it from there. Or let's make our lives even easier with the easy button that I mentioned at the very beginning. Let's just bolt it onto a function key so that when I get into that window, all I got to do is plug that key and I'm on my way. So I'm going to go over to my shortcut pane on my home page. So navigate to your home page. In this area here, give it a right click, add macro. I'm going to go in and I'm going to browse because I think it picks up maybe my name for me to begin with. Let's find out. Nope. So we're just going to go in sales, print, macro. I'm going to bolt this onto a function key. Let's go ahead and throw that on the F9 key. And then we'll hit add. So now we've got the sales print macro over there on the left-hand side. And all that should have to happen is if I was in the window, obviously I could click on that and it would go through the steps for me. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my window, open up my print sales documents. Now that I'm in here, F9 key, and I'm on my way. And I like that it doesn't even bother telling me that time that it took the time that it did. It just kind of ran through it. So huge benefit to being able to set these things up. Like I said, anything that you feel like you're plugging in and doing over and over and over and over again, the macros are extremely functional part of the system for you to be able to work with at that point. So go ahead and hop out of here. Where else could you have it function? A lot of different places. I would say anywhere that you feel like you know, it's the same thing that you're doing over and over again. You know, for instance, here, I always find myself having to check these boxes anytime I'm looking up a PO. Maybe I just wanted to check that for me as soon as I get into that window. Well, record those steps and you're on your way. Maybe it's always I'm looking at by the receipt number, whatever it may be. Record those steps and you've got a quick and easy way to be able to plug that into the system and have it populate those things for you to begin with. Reports are a nice way of being able to do that as well. You could bolt it onto maybe a report window and have it record that you selected the current date, any of those types of things. So a lot of benefits to being able to work with those, plug in the quick and easy buttons for you to be able to run through any window that you're in. One thing that I do like to do with these, if I'm going to bolt them onto a function key, and they're not really functional over here, because you see how if I click on this right now, it doesn't do anything because that window isn't available. And so it kind of fails out. So it's a little not functional at that point because you have to have the window pulled up to begin with. In most instances, at least in the way that I designed this one. So because I don't have that window active, you notice how it's not functional. Even though I pulled that window open, it's not finding it because whenever I click back here, then this window is active behind it. So in the event that you're doing something that's going to perform the steps when I open the window in the system, I like to add a folder over here. And this goes with anything else that you're doing, but usually I like to add a folder. Once I add that folder, I'm just going to rename it and call it macros. And then I just take that and I throw it into that folder. So right-click on the macro that I just created, cut, right-click on the folder that I just created, and paste. And now they're hidden. So I'm not accidentally clicking one of those over here on the right-hand or over on the left-hand side as I'm working through it. So the folders are a nice way to be able to set those up so that they're here behind the scenes, but it's not something I'm going to accidentally end up clicking as I work through the system. Now, if I wanted it to open that window for me, I could start at the beginning here and record me going to and selecting that specific window. So that's the other concept too. If I wanted it to open that window and get me all the way through it versus me having to go and find the window, if I go underneath the Microsoft Dynamics GP at the top, Tools, Macro, and Record, now that I'm recording the macro here, let's go ahead and auto sales print. Wanted something a little bit more functional, then I can set this up. Make sure that you keep the file extension on there if you have that showing. And I'm going to save this on the desktop. Now it's in record mode. So I'm going to go up to the drop down here, and let's go to Transactions, Sales, Print Sales Documents. Again, being nice and clean on me selecting my information, not going too many different places. Select my values, customer, sure, with the addresses, reprint, packing slip per site, print customer, come down here, batch ID, go and test, insert, and now go back to tools on this window and tell it to stop record. So we started here originally to start the recording at the base window. We didn't even have that window open. Started the record underneath the window here to get to that window, and then we went all the way through it. So now, if I add my macro shortcut to this for my auto sales print, and we'll just give it that unique name, auto sales print, and add that over there. Now this one's a little bit more functional because a click should take me through that navigation to find that window, take me into it, and get me all the way through it. So now that becomes a functional click at that point. So it just depends on what you want it to do. Is it something that when I open the window, I'm going to push a button, or do I want it to jump me there immediately with everything kind of set and get me started to be able to work with? So a lot of different functions, obviously, for this. Get in, play around with it. Be careful with data entry type things with it and stuff that's trying to post, I don't necessarily suggest anything that's going to try to process documents in the system, but for populating a window, absolutely beneficial.